Welcome back. Don't worry, be happy. Morning Joe episode this morning. We'll explain that for those of you just waking up later. But let's continue talking about Joe Biden. House Majority Whip James Clyburn, who's the highest ranking African American in Congress, invoked South Carolina's segregationist senator in defending Biden, telling Politico, "I worked with Strom Thurmond all my life. You don't have to agree with people to work with them." David Ignatius, I think that's the point. And you know, when you have people like Jim Clyburn coming out, who've been around, who's done this for a very long time, who also is the most powerful voice in Democratic politics in South Carolina, that certainly provides Joe Biden some cover. I'm curious, though, what are your thoughts about the conversation you've been hearing?
So I think it's fascinating and goes to the heart of what the rest of this Democratic nomination battle is going to be about. Joe Biden is, with these comments, stating directly that he thinks the country is looking for somebody who can work with the other side in this angry, divided country, somebody who can reach out to people he doesn't agree with, doesn't look at the world the same way with, but get things done. You look at recent polls, recent Pew Research poll, for example, and there's clearly an intense, growing feeling in the country that people are sick of this divisive politics. Biden's problem is he's got to win the nomination. And what may work as a general election theme, I can work with the other guy, doesn't work so well in this nominating fight. Joe Biden also has a way of making kind of loose comments. This talk about it, they didn't call me boy, they called me son. I mean, that's just an easy target. It was sloppy use of language. He's going to be, I can imagine in the first big debate, he's going to spend a lot of time defending it, not talking about the things he wants. But the bet he's making is the basic message, similar to what you were saying on his behalf, is one the country wants to hear.
Yeah, and the real problem is, Jonathan, is the fact that he just sort of rambled around.
Sure.
Not only in the fundraiser, but then in his presser afterwards. He just has to be locked down. And I don't know who around him can actually tell him that, but he never goes into a fundraiser without reading from the teleprompter. I remember making fun of John Kerry in 2004 because he'd have teleprompters at every event, no matter how small they were. Pretty damn smart.
Yeah, I mean,
and that's what I was wrong. He was right, and that's something that Joe Biden needs to do. Every event.
Right. This is the inherent challenge of Joe Biden, is that he does this. He rambles. He just will get in front of the microphone or in front of a crowd and just start talking. And 5-minute remarks turn into 15, and 15 turn into 30. Let's remember, of course, he's run for president twice before, and neither of those campaigns went all that well. And he was undone in part by gaffes like this, that he would stray from the message, he would stray from the script, and that would get himself in trouble by doing so. I mean, certainly he's not to the extreme that President Trump is in terms of being unable to stay on message, but there is a problem with discipline with Biden. And I think there is a frustration among some Democrats who believe in him, who suggest that if he were to stick on the script, because he is the front runner, because he does, he checks in many ways the right boxes and seems to be saying what America, at least a percentage of America, wants to hear, that he would, be the overwhelming favorite if he wouldn't be undone by self-inflicted wounds. And I think that what we saw yesterday, and we've seen now a few times in the last couple of weeks, and we see that he is still prone to these gaffes. We're seeing his poll numbers slide just a little, but there's a long way to go. And as much as let's give him credit for allowing the press pool to be in his fundraisers, which I believe he's the only candidate to do so, but he hasn't done much media yet. He hasn't done many events where he's interacted with the public or the press. And the more he does that on these debate stages and other places, the more chances he's going to have to go off script and screw up.
Yeah, and this is so predictable for Joe Biden that this is a problem. That even somebody as slow, even a dumb country lawyer like me, could see it coming. I wrote this last week, and I'm going to go to Jim Van Dyke, because Jim's always like, hey, could you read more of your writing? It makes Jim happy. So I'm doing this for Jim. But look, this was just last week. And again, the point's not that I'm some soothsayer. It's like, this was really obvious, and this was a real unforced error. In fact, Biden's successful campaign launch in 2020 owes much to his newfound political discipline. Until last week's flip-flop on abortion funding, the Democratic frontrunner kept most of his loquacious instincts in check. If he can restrain himself for 16 more months, Biden is likely to be our 46th president. If you think I'm trying to send Joe Biden a message with this column, you are correct. Too much is riding on next year's election for any Democratic candidate to shoot from the hip rhetorically. And that's exactly, Jim Vandehei, it's exactly what Joe Biden did. And by the way, we now have the abortion funding flip-flop with the Hyde Amendment and this boy versus son comment that he made. He's got to stop it now.
By the way, it's your soothing voice as much as the eloquence of your words that I want to hear every day.
Well, and by the way, Jim, I want you to know, coming soon, a mindfulness evening, Chuck, where I'm going to have the sound of Bobbling Brooks, and I'm going to say, Joe Biden. And I'll read the news sort of in that voice.
Right, they just got better.
Focus on your kneecap as I tell you about Joe Biden. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
There's no doubt this topic consumes.
Hold on, breaking news. Mika's not here. Go ahead.
This topic consumes Biden's people in terms of how do you get him to be more disciplined. And by the way, until recently, he's been pretty darn disciplined by Joe Biden's standards. I think, to bring this full circle to what you said at the top of the show, if I were him, I'd be less worried necessarily about the gaffe in the moment. I'd be more worried when people like Elizabeth Warren can start to become storytellers about a different way to think about sort of her policy ideas and the direction of the country. They're unnerved by Warren because there's something has changed with her in her ability to not just talk about policy, because most people I don't think really want to get into the weeds on policy, but to weave it together. If you think about why did Trump win? Like, he had a story to tell, and he hit it over and over. Barack Obama had a very specific story to tell. She is developing a story, and it's a different story for how you could really change policy and sort of change inequality, and then she feeds in those policies to back it up. And so if I'm him, I'm a little more worried, because what you said earlier is right, Joe. If you think about everybody else who's not, Biden's at the top at 30%. Where do you think all those other people go when the field narrows? Hard to see a lot of them gravitating towards him. You could see a lot of them gravitating towards her or Buttigieg or Kamala or Bernie Sanders, whoever emerges as that alternative to Joe Biden. So I'd keep an eye on that.
Yeah, we need to keep an eye on that. Jim Vandehei, thank you so much for being with us, and I hope you'll guest host on my mindfulness evening podcast. Will you do that?
I'll be there. Yeah, I'll do yoga.
I'll just, you know what? You don't have to do anything. You just focus on your breathing.
I can't do that.
You just focus on where you are.
I need to do something.
Okay, well, listen, hot yoga with Tim Ryan coming up after the break with Jim Vandehei. But we're going to be talking about Big Papi, Iran, and Roy Moore. We'll be right back. Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.